I want to welcome everybody to our Chamber University and thank you for attending today. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this will be recorded for you to view later if you need to. I want to take a moment and thank Cedar Park Economic Development for being our presenting sponsor for our Chamber University series. Our speaker today will be John Gonzales. John is the Regional Director for the U.S. Chamber for the Southwest and South Central region, which represents 8 states. He works on a variety of efforts with the U.S. Chamber and brings more than 25 years of experience in the federal government and politics to his current role. He has been a member of the regional team since 2005, and I believe I first met John in 2007, so we've known each other for a long time. Today, John will be giving an overview of the forgiveness side of the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as a Phase 4 update. Please join me in welcoming virtually Mr. John Gonzales.
Thank you, Tony. First, let me say good morning to everybody. Let me also say thank you to Tony and your team for all the great work y'all are doing for your members and the Cedar Park community. Local and state chambers have been on the front lines of this historic pandemic and economic struggle, working with local, state, and federal officials daily. Small businesses are making real-time decisions based on information you are providing. So thank you for your leadership, Tony, and partnership with us as we continue to review the ongoing legislation, regulations, and ever-changing policy guidelines. I want to begin with a quote from our VP of Small Business Policy, Tom Sullivan, who works at headquarters in DC, from just a few weeks ago. And his quote was, quite simply, "We view local chambers of commerce and civic groups as the economic emergency rooms for businesses throughout the country. These are nonprofits that have hosted SBA officials, elected members of Congress, CDC officials, and public health experts, unemployment experts, and others to help the business community survive. So providing PPP funding to local chambers would extend a much needed lifeline to businesses around the country," end quote. I'm sure we can all agree with that statement. So we continue with your help to make chambers of commerce eligible for PPP loans under the CARES Act, and we appreciate your support and everything you do there on behalf of all our chamber friends. Well, for now, the House and Senate passed a bill, and it was signed by the President on June 5th, which was the making improvements to the Paycheck Protection Program. It was something like PPP Flexibility Act. There were some really great improvements. I wish we would have seen more, but it was a very good bill that passed both the House and the Senate overwhelmingly in an effort to give small businesses more opportunities to maximize their loan forgiveness. Additionally, it's important to remember that a PPP borrower doesn't go to the SBA and doesn't go to Treasury for their loan forgiveness. They go back to the original lender that they worked with when they received their PPP loan. So what did the Flexibility Act do? Just a few highlights that I think are the most important ones. It extends the loan term from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, lowers the percentage of loan proceeds that must be used for payroll from 75 down to 60%. It extending the deadline to restore FTEs, your full-time employees, and payroll from June 30th, 2020 to December 31st, 2020, and setting the repayment terms for loans made after June 4th, 2020 at 5 years. We view the loan forgiveness process as a three-step process. The first step is to determine the maximum amount of possible loan forgiveness. And that's based on what you, the borrower, spent in the 24-week period after the loan was made. The second step is to determine how much of that maximum amount of loan forgiveness will be reduced based on certain characteristics of your business, namely the number of employees that you have relative to a reference period and the level of wages that you're paying your employees. The third step is a general rule that requires that 60% of your total loan forgiveness amount be dedicated to payroll expenses. The SBA and Treasury continue to update their policies and guidelines, so be mindful of that. We're constantly updating our own materials based on updates that SBA and Treasury make, and it seems to be almost on a weekly basis, sometimes more. Also, just a note on what we are asking SBA when it comes to forgiveness of the loan. We are encouraging them to create a grant calculator to make it as simple as possible to help small business owners calculate their forgiveness amount. Maybe think about something like a tax where you just plug in the numbers and it tells you automatically how much you qualify. And so we have asked them to make, in addition to that though, we've asked them to make any loan to a small business that was below $250,000 automatically a grant. So no promises with those two asks, but stay tuned because we're not the only ones asking SBA to do this. We're just trying to help them streamline and make this as simple as possible, because even with the Flexibility Act, it's still pretty complicated, and people are still having some difficulty, and so are the lenders, because the guidelines, again, constantly change, and they see it differently a lot of times than SBA does. So speaking of SBA, last week they announced, last week or the week before, they announced that small businesses and nonprofits and independent contractors who have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic can also, can once again apply for the EIDL program loan, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL program, and the EIDL Advance program. So as you may have seen, SBA had shut that down to make it only ag only, and had drastic limits to the amount that you could borrow, but now they've reopened that up just a little over a week ago. So the EIDL program provides, as many of y'all probably know, long-term, low-interest assistance for qualifying businesses to help alleviate temporary loss of revenue, and can be used to cover payroll and inventory, pay debt, or fund other expenses. The EIDL Advances provides up to $10,000 or $1,000 per employee of emergency financial relief to businesses which do not have to be repaid. These are grants. So if that benefits you, you may want to look at SBA EIDL loan. So now the Senate has been in session since June 1st, working on phase 4 or CARES 2.0, whichever way you want to refer to it. And we're expecting completion of that possibly by late July, early August, before the August recess. We're expecting that, but we've seen some delays. You know, a month ago or so, I said that they would get this done before the July 4th recess, and then it quickly changed. So we'll see if they hold to that target. We will no doubt include liability. The bill itself, Phase 4 or CARES 2.0, will no doubt include liability protection or safe harbor for healthcare workers, business owners, and employees from lawsuits pertaining to the COVID-19 outbreak. So Leader McConnell emphasized, overemphasized that any future relief efforts must include these protections, these safe harbor liability protections. And our own Senator Cornyn is the point person on that legislation. Other items expected to be included are the surprise billing, unemployment reform, and state and local government funding. So as the Senate continues to work on this legislation, we all need to continue to contact our elected officials to assist them as this legislation moves forward. They need to hear from you, the good ideas and the bad. A few other notes that I want to reference is we also created a video that's about 25 minutes long that walks you through the PPP loan forgiveness process, and it answers some of the most frequent questions that we get from businesses regarding loan forgiveness, the loan forgiveness process. So it's a great video with Neil Bradley, who's our National Policy Director and our Senior Vice President, going over step by step. It's about, like I said, it's 25 minutes long, so it's worth listening to that. But then we also updated our guide along with this webinar, and they're both available on the U.S. Chamber website. If you go to uschamber.com/PPP forgiveness, you will find that video and our updated materials on the process, which I shared with Tony, and I will make this all available to him so he can, of course, share with you all, and any other additional information. I'll be happy to help get that for you. And finally, I just want to mention, as many of you all may have heard, and I'm sure you've seen, the U.S. Chamber announced that we will hold a national town hall this Thursday as part of an ongoing initiative to address inequality of opportunity through education, employment, entrepreneurship, and criminal justice reform. And I want to thank Tony and the Cedar Park Chamber for partnering with this important initiative that will be this Thursday from 1:30 to 3:30 Central Time. We just released the agenda. There's some fabulous speakers. We're really excited about this, and we really want to thank all our partners that signed on to this really, really important initiative. I think it's going to be really incredible, and it's going to be a great dialogue, and I hope many of y'all can tune in. With that, Tony, I certainly appreciate everything you all do. You know, we couldn't do this without our state and local partners, and we know how important it is to have great partnerships with you all, because you know, members of Congress hear us all the time, and they always refer back to, well, I want to hear from my constituents. I want to hear from my district. I want to hear from the chambers in my district. So you all are crucial to us as we move forward with some of these very important initiatives and legislation. So with that, Tony, I'll turn it back over to you. Happy to take any questions. If you have, if there's something I left off, you know, please remind me. And again, thank you for all you do.
Yeah, no problem. One thing that I do want to mention is, you know, I appreciate the U.S. Chamber. They are a plethora of information. And for those who are watching right now, you know, I know that most of y'all have been getting our daily newsletter that is now turned into a twice-a-week newsletter. A lot of that information that I send out comes from the U.S. Chamber, and they're great, you know, great partners with us. So we appreciate all you do. They will be getting a reminder email about that Thursday town hall. It's going out this afternoon, actually. So just want to make sure everybody knows that as well. You'll be able to register online for that. We did get a couple of questions, in our Q&A. If you have a question in the Q&A or a question, go to the Q&A and type it up right now. We've got a little bit of time here. So the first one is, will there be a second round of PPP? And you kind of answered that already.
Yes. The real question is, will there be any money in that account? And I've been told that there is, that it's flush with cash right now, both SBA and PPP. So yes, it's a really good idea that if you haven't applied, to move forward, because at some point, there are some odds up in DC with, at what point will it run out of money again? We really don't think that that's likely, but it'd probably be a good idea if you're interested to go ahead and get the process going.
Very good. What are other options that are still available from the SBA other than PPP?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned, I didn't go into a lot of detail on the EIDL loan process. The SBA has done, with all the issues that we've had, they've done an unbelievable amount of work in an unbelievable short period of time. I want to say that they did something like 14 million loans in like 14 days, something like that. It's the equivalent to 4 years of work that they did in 14 days. So it's unbelievable work that they've done. But the EIDL is their most popular. It's that I mentioned, and they've got great information on their website. They've got on those EIDL loans, if you're a nonprofit, the loan, I believe it's 2.75% is the loan, the price of the interest on the loan. And if you're a business, it's 3.75. And I think those go out to 10 or more years. I want to say maybe even 20 years, depending on the amount. So it's definitely worth going to SBA.gov, and they've got great information that's all right there on their website.
Yep, absolutely.
And we have materials on that too, if you need that.
Yeah, I think some of those even go out 30 years, and I believe
Sure. Yeah.
in one of the calls that I listened to about the SBA, the first payment isn't due for 12 months as well.
Yeah,
so
for a year. That's right.
Yeah.
It really, if you really need, that's just a great tool to utilize it if you really need it.
Yeah. What type of paperwork will be expected for the forgiveness?
Yeah, that's where it becomes complicated. As much paperwork that you can gather is what's needed. I mean, literally, they're going to need paperwork for everything. That's one of the reasons why we ask, or we're continuing to push with SBA to say, you know what, why don't we just make these automatically a grant if they're below a certain amount, or that calculator I mentioned to come up with, Intuit. Somebody out there can come up with, you plug and play, you plug in the numbers, and then it spits out an answer on what's forgivable, and then you can go back and say, oh, well, I have some paperwork. Any bit of information you need, even employees, if they did not want to return back to the job, you need to have a letter that said, here's the offer to that employee, and they replied by saying no for whatever reason. As much detail as possible.
Good. What happens if I received a PPP and my business just can't sustain itself and has to shut down? Will I be required to pay back the full amount?
That's a great question. I believe this is another one of those guidelines that we're waiting on, that the SBA has not come out fully with some of these personal difficulties that we believe at some point that they will have to consider those, especially if you've done everything right. You've done everything they've asked you, but you know depending on your part of town or your county, you know, you didn't open up as quickly. People weren't out and about getting to your business, and you did everything right, and you still had to close your door. That's something that we're still working on, and I believe at some point they're going to have to make a decision on this. The extension was great, but you're right. If you don't have the volume of business to remain open, and you did everything right, it should have eventually just become a grant. But we still need final word from SBA.
Okay. Got a couple more here, and we'll try to wrap this up by 10:30. We appreciate your time. What timeline do you think we may see updated loan forgiveness guidance?
Yeah, so we are waiting on that. They've issued some, I believe was last Friday, I believe, is when they gave us a clue on where they were going. Remember, the Flexibility Act was just signed by the president on June 5th. So there hasn't been that much time for SBA to go fully through the law. But we want to give SBA, one of the things that we wanted to see more than anything was to give SBA and Treasury as much flexibility as possible. Because when the law itself, if you stick to the letter of the law, a lot of the first PPP version did not give them a lot of flexibility. The Flexibility Act did, but there was still more to do. And I think those updated guidelines, we'll probably see some more this Friday, but stay tuned, and we'll keep Tony updated on that.
Very good. How much flexibility will the local banks have in terms of forgiveness?
That the local lender that you went to get the loan in the first place only has as much flexibility as SBA allows them to have. Now, they may have a difference of opinion, but they would have to get that approved by SBA. So once they turned that loan application or the forgiveness application into, they look at it, they review it, and they say, oh, this looks great. I think you're going to be, this is going to be full grant forgiveness. And they submit it to SBA. Well, that could take 60 days, possibly. So, and the bank may get updates, and they may require some additional information, or it may be sent back to the bank saying, hey, we need more details, or we don't understand this. So ultimately, SBA makes that loan forgiveness decision with the bank, but the bank could definitely be your advocate.
Is there any advantage to waiting to apply for forgiveness? My business used the original 8-week timeline and will expend the last of the funds in payroll this week.
Oh, that's a tough one. With the loan, with the Flexibility Act, with the extension of terms, I don't want to say yes or no, but with the extension of terms, and it could be in the details of what I sent you earlier today, Tony. The extension, I believe, allows you to defer, but again, we need to look at the updated guidelines. Again, those are probably not even a week old, I believe, and so you need to go into that, or ask your lender what your guidelines are there of extension, and I believe it's there. I believe it is extended. That included everything. When they extended it to the end of December 31st of this year, I believe it extended that as well.
Got time for one more question here. Can idle non-grant be used to pay off higher interest debt incurred prior to the pandemic?
On the idle loan, I believe so, but not PPP.
Right.
That's what I recall.
That's my recollection too. I think it's prior to February something. I think is the guidance. But
there is a date. Yeah, there is a date. It actually may be March 1st.
Yeah.
But Tony, you're right. It's either mid February or March 1st prior. Yes,
yeah.
You can, but you can't mix. If you qualify for an idle and you qualify for PPP, you can't mix the funds. You can't pay one with the other. But previous loans, I believe, for idle, you can use for paying down other loans.
All right. Well, I got a couple of in the Q&A section, at least a couple of awesome job, John. Thanks so much. Nice having a real-time discussion. So we got a couple of those in there as well. So again, we want to thank you, John. Truly, it's always good to hear from our partners at the U.S. Chamber, and thank you to the U.S. Chamber for allowing us your time. I want to thank, again, Cedar Park Economic Development for being our presenting sponsor for this. And with that, again, John is available to many of our businesses. And so if y'all have questions, email me, and I'll if I can't answer them, I'll send it on to John, who has always been good at getting back with us. So again, we truly appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a nice day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.